Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a really special episode of Haley Carr TV today. Today, I'm interviewing someone who I really look up to. I think is an absolutely wonderful human being, and someone who I've done recently a little bit of personal work with, and it's really made a difference to my life. But not only that, she's really changing a lot of people's lives with her amazing work. And her name is Ezzie Spencer. And Ezzie trained as a lawyer and then went on to work in government, non-profit and research sectors and earned her PhD in women's well-being and justice after violence. Feeling like something elemental was missing in the intellectual world of law, Ezzie began to explore the correlation she noticed between her feelings and the phases of the moon. And her concept, lunar abundance, marries intellect with intuition and has reaped results for so many women through Ezzie's one-on-one coaching sessions, through the support of a flourishing online salon, the Lunar Abundance Salon, and now through her incredible new book, An Abundant Life. Thank you so much for being here, Ezzie.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show, Haley.
You're so welcome. So let's just dive in, and I'd love to talk to you about how you came to be where you are today. You have such a wonderful, pragmatic background, which made me love you so much even more when I discovered your work because, as I'll share a bit later, I was so new to all this lunar work. And can you please share with everyone how you found this work, like how you discovered it and what inspired you?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it is, it's so interesting because I really did stumble upon it in a way. I really was seeking at the time that I started to work with the moon, which was a time in my mid-20s, and I was working in the law and I trained as a lawyer, and I had really enjoyed that very sort of rigorous intellectual training and the work that I was doing in many ways because I was really, I think, predisposed to thinking a lot, and I was living from the neck up in a lot of ways, and I was having that sense that there was something missing. I was feeling that sense of disconnection from my body, from my own cycles, my own rhythms, a sense of disconnection from something a little bigger than myself. A sense of disconnection even from myself in a way, but this was really lurking at the periphery of my awareness because I had the external trappings of success. I had a good job, and I was, surrounded by really inspiring people. But we were all very cerebral, and I was yearning. My heart was yearning for something deeper, to feel fully fulfilled in life. And I started to keep a journal. And so I would work, really long hours by day. And then in the evenings, I would come home and I would write in my journal to try to make sense of what it was that I was feeling, why I was feeling like I was missing something when I had everything on the outside ticked all of the boxes. And I did at some point, as I was journaling, trying to make sense of myself and my feelings and my emotions, because actually that wasn't part of the language of what I was really, working with, and certainly the law, because it's so rigorous and mental. There really isn't that sense of connection to feelings and emotions in that profession at all. It's very masculine in that way. And, I really started to explore those through my journal at night. And at some point, I don't know exactly when it was or even exactly why it was. There weren't any sort of books on the moon at this point that I was aware of. But I started to draw in my journal little phases of the moon. So I'd actually draw a little picture of where the moon was in the sky in relation to which phase it was in the cycle. Moon cycle lasts for about a month, goes for 8 phases, moves through 8 phases in that month-long cycle. And so you can actually see that at night if you go outside and look up, which, so many of us don't do. And I certainly didn't do it, growing up in a city. It wasn't part of my, experience and engagement with the natural environment was to, see where the moon was at night. I would notice the full moon, as many of us do, particularly now that it's so trendy on social media. post about the full moon. But, I was really starting to engage with my environment in a way which was really exciting to me. It took me outside of myself. It started to show me there was something bigger. And what I found as I would draw into my journal with these little phases is that there were actually correlations that would emerge between how I was feeling, what my energy levels were, what kind of emotions were going on for me, and the intensity of those emotions and the desires of my body. My heart and my soul at certain times. There were correlations between how I was feeling and where the moon was in the sky. And because the moon cycle does go for about a month and then it starts again, and I would go through the 8 phases again in my journal, I would notice that those correlations would actually repeat. So they would form these repeating patterns, which gave me more of a sense of predictability about the way I was going to feel at certain times of the month, because that was repeating. And I thought this was so fascinating. And I started to go deeper and deeper into this practice and into working with the moon as a mirror, really, as that tool for that self-reflection and that inquiry within myself. And as I started to go deeper and deeper within myself, I started to get, through this journaling practice, through working with the moon phases in this way, I started to get, greater clarity about what work I was really here to do. And I realized that whilst I really did like the law, I didn't love it. It actually wasn't fulfilling like that deeper calling for me. I went to law school because I got the grades to go to law school. I didn't really ever stop and think carefully or mindfully about what were my own strengths, my own skills, what was it that I wanted to contribute. And so I went through that process of considering that and sidestepped at this time into legal academia, where I started a PhD on women's wellbeing after sexual violence. I'd worked on a big domestic violence national law reform inquiry, and it was an issue that really inflamed me. I felt like, there was such injustice in this area. There was so much work to be done. So I was really passionate about the topic. I was also really passionate about, working in more of a researcher environment. Those were the aspects of my previous job which I really enjoyed. So I went into legal academia and I started to lecture and teach and also work on research as well as doing my PhD. So I did have a busy schedule. I had a full schedule, but for the first time I had a more flexible schedule. And so what I was able to do at that time is to really apply those ebbs and flows that I was experiencing. I was learning what my body really felt like it wanted to do and how it wanted to be at certain times throughout the month at different moon phases. I was able to really listen to that, honor that, respect that. And there were times where, I'd take my foot off the gas a little bit because I didn't actually need to be at the desk, for X number of hours, clocking in, clocking off. I was able to show up and do the work in a way where I was able to, actually do more work at the time when I was more energized and therefore a lot more effective and productive, and able to rest at the time when my body was really craving some more rest. And it was so fascinating to me that even though I stepped outside of the way that, the push and the hustle and the go, being on 5, 6, 7 days a week, and I'd come into this more restful way of working, this more, intuitive way of working, I actually found that I was more effective with the work that I was doing. I did the PhD in record time and got a perfect result. And I was actually trying less and pushing less. And so I was enjoying myself and I was getting better results. And I thought, this is so interesting. This runs in the face of everything that we've been taught about how to be effective and productive. And I am, I'm really having such a positive experience doing this work. And I was working in a challenging area, and I was, in the sense of the subject matter was challenging, but I really felt like I was allowing myself to be filled up so that I had a lot more to give in that way. So I started to share this with others because I just thought this was amazing, when I was learning. And so I started to do, firstly I was doing sessions that were free and, built up then a word of mouth coaching practice. And I started to do live events and workshops because I just wanted to share. And then people started to assume this is my job and started to ask me how much I charge. So I started to charge for these sessions. And then it was only ever something I intended would be a little passion project, a hobby whilst I was going through the PhD. But it was something that ended up, growing exponentially actually, because at the end of the day, I realized working directly with women and helping them to effect transformation in their own lives was actually really what brought me alive. And so, and I loved working with this material. It was just so innovative and interesting and creative. And I ended up actually building a full-time business out of it. But that was never what I expected would happen when I started my own personal lunar practice 10 years ago.
Totally. That is such a cool story about just following the cues and following the cues. I always admire people so much who gain knowledge through tracking things and watch patterns. It's such a skill. And I love that you mentioned that in how you started discovering this work and seeing the similarities, because I just think that's amazing. You mentioned something just then that's made me super curious, and I'd really love to hear just a little bit more about that. It was how you said, and I know that you mentioned this when I came to your book launch as well. When you did your PhD, it was supposed to be hard, and everyone says it's really hard, but you found it so much more easy and flowing. And I remember you talking about in the process of writing your book, because you used your practice, your book process was almost record timed to get published and get written, and it was also beautiful and easy for you as well. Can you speak a little bit on that, like what you think might be the key aspects to noticing when someone is making a mountain out of a molehill or taking on this idea or belief system that something is going to be hard, how they might actually, and how you did it, how you transferred that to be an easy, really joyful process for yourself?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this question, Hayley, because I'm really passionate about really unwinding some of the mythology around struggle. And I feel like, we often do, we imbibe this sort of, collective consciousness about things having to be really difficult. And I just feel like, in the case of the PhD, I thought what an incredible privilege this is to be able to, research and to write and to make a difference in this area where there's so much change that needs to happen. For women who are winding their way through the legal system, who've experienced, violence and trauma, it can be very re-traumatizing to go through that process. And, I just thought, my God, this is such an incredible privilege for me to get to help in this area. And because I had done that, element of self-awareness, I knew that I enjoyed the process of excavation and discovery and research and writing. And so that would be the first thing, is to have some awareness around yourself and what it is that you like to do and what it is that you really dislike to do. And if doing a PhD or writing a book is something that sounds the most awful thing in the world, the first thing is just don't do it. Or find other ways, because there's so many different ways. You can write a book through, dictation, for instance. You could get a ghostwriter to help you write a book if you just despise writing, for instance. But for many of us, actually, in the case of the book as well, it's like, I had always wanted to write a book. I just didn't really know how I was going to start, or what exactly I was going to write about. And so I think many of us do have that urge we're drawn towards these bigger projects. So if you're hearing the call in the first instance, it's like that's a good indication that you can go down that path and that you can make this a really joyful, positive experience. The next thing, which I would say, is intention. And it is so important to set an intention, and an intention that really captures how it is that you want to feel as you go through a process. So if you want something to feel joyful and easy and abundant, and if you want there to be that flow involved in it, then make sure that you're setting an intention for that and get really clear that that's the experience you want to create for yourself. And also set an intention about why it is that you're doing it. And if there's a higher purpose to any kind of work that you're doing, and I'm sure many listeners actually want to make a positive impact on the world, want to make a difference, and to get specific about what exactly it is you want to have your readers or your listeners to feel and to do when they are, engaging with your work once it's done. That can be another intention. The publication process for me, in the case of the book, was another intention that I set, that I wanted the publication process to be easy and simple and abundant. I didn't want to have to go through, all these awful negotiations and arduous processes of getting a publisher. And so I set an intention. I thought to myself, that probably means that I'll self-publish, which is actually a really good option. But I ended up bringing in the right publisher in Australia and then also in the US. I ended up getting fantastic publishers who have been amazing to work with and who have helped me to bring the book to the next level. And so it really does start with intention, and I can't emphasize enough how much time I spent with my intention throughout the process. And this is the lunar practice as well. But then also, that's sort of more of the right brain, that's more of the intuitive, that's more of the feeling, more of the feminine, more of the yin, if you will. But then I always feel that the yin is most potent when it's married with the yang. It's just that many of us tend to operate more from that yang or more masculine mode, because that tends to be what is exalted and lauded and rewarded by our society. So in bringing in the yin and the feelings doesn't mean that the thinking and the rationality and the structure and the logic isn't important. It's just that there's a healthy balance and harmony between the two things. That tends to me to be how that, the joyfulness and the ease tends to really flow. But, you don't forget about the structure and the planning of any project. And I also, I like to work very effectively, very efficiently. I'm very clear with my priorities. I have got a lot of, background working in the law and in legal academia and in public policy and government. So, the amount of, up that very clear structures and outlines and plans at the beginning, it then gives you that space. It holds the container for you to be creative and inspired and flow throughout the process. So I think those two things together are super, super important. And then the final thing that I'll say about that is really knowing that even though, it's if you're wanting to create this joyful experience for you, and it's possible, because, I'm living proof that writing a PhD really, joyful and can be done quickly and can be done effectively. And I'm also an example of a book as well. Going down to write the first draft to having the book on the shelves for me was under a year. And so, it can be done. I'm living proof that it can be done. But it doesn't mean that there won't be challenges throughout the process. It's just how you engage with those challenges and, not to get really caught up in them and to identify those challenges and to, use those challenges as data for a limiting belief that you have about things actually needing to be a big struggle and being hard. But just knowing that, it does take work. Like, of course it takes work to do a PhD. Of course it takes work to do a book. Like, of course there'll be snags that you'll hit along the way, but you are resourceful, you are resilient, you have set up something really beautiful for yourself with your structures, with your planning, with your intentions, and that can really help you to flow and do it in a way where the overall experience can actually be incredibly positive.
I love that so much. I think that what you just said will be music to my audience's ears, because we're all sort of renowned yang dominant human beings who will find that it's either all planning and all structure and no freedom, or it's all intention and sort of nothing gets done, or the structure gets lost and the timelines blow out and all that kind of stuff. So that's absolutely wonderful. And just, to sort of add to that, what I learned from you, Ezzie, I actually took, for everyone who's listening, I took Ezzie's Lunar Abundance Salon earlier this year, and I happened to sign up to it 2 days before I had a launch. And one of my belief systems that I was really worried about was that launching is really hard and it's really tough. And through going through your salon, it was just a really beautiful and easy process. Sure, there were challenges. There were some structural things that needed to be in place and happen, but it was just, you really taught me how to do that intention with the correct amount of energy and emotion, so that I knew what actions were aligned and which actions were not aligned. Just regarding intentions, I know that a lot of people ask, like, what's the difference between an intention and a goal? So can you sort of share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, in the way that I approach it, I look at goals as being more in the yang mode of operating, and then the intentions being more yin. And so that the way that I look at this, I look at the yang being much more in that objectively measured, much more structured, and many of us, I'm sure your listeners, are familiar with the SMART goal setting system. I think it's such a, that's the kind of benchmark I would say that that the yang goal setting would work with. You're looking at something specific. It needs to be measurable, objectively measurable. There are specific action steps that you will take at specific times, time limited. You want to make sure that the goal is realistic. And I think that can be a very effective way of setting goals, and I think the goals are actually really, really positive thing. But my experience is that I was all over goals, and many of the women that I work with are all over goals and goal setting and that process. But the missing piece was more of the yin intention setting process, which for me is much more feeling based. And when I talk about feelings, what I mean is the physical sensations in our body. And so I mentioned before that when I was really working in my previous career, I was living from the neck up. I was disembodied. I felt really disconnected from my physical self. And yes, I exercised and I went to the gym and I went on walks and all of that type of thing. But I wasn't really paying a huge amount of attention to what my body really needed in terms of food and rest and, even the types of exercise, for instance. And that was because I was really disconnected from those physical sensations. And so part of the intention setting process is about actually coming back and anchoring into the body, like into our physical selves, and to really feel what is going on and feel what's going on in different parts of our body as well. And many of us, as we go through this process for the first time, as we're setting, these more, what can feel more abstract because they're more subjectively experienced, the intentions, it's more of an inner experience. And it can be much more based on, what broader themes, for instance, what it is that we'd like to cultivate in our life at any given time. And that may actually be, if you're numb as you're starting to feel into your body for the first time, it might actually be that sense of feeling more embodied. Or you might want to make it more, you might want to link it to something else in your life. For instance, if you are in in a very busy, stressful environment by, because of your work environment or because of, something that's going on at home, to really be looking at, well, how can I have more flow and ease in my life? Or in the case of you in the launch, how can I make this launching process, more graceful? How can I allow myself to flow? How can I experience more joy through this process? And then to actually feel that in your body. And so, allow yourself to feel, is this experience, I'm experiencing this in my chest. What does that feel like? Is there, say, a sensation of warmth? Is there a sensation of, expansion? Am I actually feeling some pain? Because what can often happen when we are out of our bodies, when we're really stuck in our heads, that when we start to come into our bodies, we realize that one of the reasons why we're disembodied is because we do experience tension and contraction and physical pain in our bodies. And that's what we're trying to get away from, because we don't necessarily know how to hold that, how to handle that within ourselves. So this lunar practice, which I teach and go through in the book in much more detail, is much more about helping us in a very, very safe and gentle way start to come back into our bodies. And one of the ways that we can practice that, because it is a practice, it does take time. You can start to see results very quickly, like you mentioned before, actually show up to it. But if, it can take a little while to go deeper and deeper. And you will find, I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm still going deeper and deeper myself. I'm still discovering more and more layers, of myself through this practice. But if you allow yourself to really feel in your body that intention, feel those physical sensations, and allow yourself to return to that intention each day throughout the moon cycle. I like to set intentions at the new moon, start the first of the 8 phases, the start of the cycle, and then work with that intention on a daily basis throughout the rest of the cycle. That's a really beautiful way for you to start to embody this knowing on a more cellular level.
That is so cool. And so Ezzie goes through all of the different cycles of the moon in her book and exactly what to do and how to work them throughout the book. And that's so, it's just so easy to read when she talks about it. And so Ezzie, I'm still relatively new to the moon world. So many women that I know have said that they've always had a connection to it. You know, when they were a little girl, they always used to look up at the moon. I never did. Like, I have to admit, I remember sitting outside of an event with Soul Sister Circle a couple of years ago. This was actually her first event with my friend Em. And I was saying to her, what's everyone's obsession with the moon? Because in Byron Bay, it's a huge thing. It's like, oh, the moon made me do it. And I was like, what is, I don't get it. So it made me, and then knowing that you came from law over to this, it made me even more curious as to sort of what made the switch for you. So the reason why I'm asking this question is because I know a lot of the women and men actually who will be listening to this are kind of on the precipice of a big change, and they almost hold back from connecting to that more yin or I guess almost a spiritual side of themselves, which the moon can be related to because it's more connected to the subconscious. But what sort of challenges arose for you, if any, when you started to sort of place more curiosity and reflection, and then your career, depending on this work? Like, did you feel scared to kind of take the dive in and talk more about it? Did you experience resistance? And, what happened if you did experience that? What was your experience like with sort of almost coming out with this?
It's such a good question, because I feel like going very slowly over multiple moon cycles for me, and actually over multiple years, was key, in the sense that when I started doing this work, I really didn't know other people doing this work. I didn't know any other entrepreneurs. It was, my world at that time was really quite narrow in a sense. And so I really did, follow my intuition and connected in more with my intuition through this process, and followed my intuition and went very, very slowly with it. And so I feel like it's not like I did a weekend workshop and was like, right, that's it, nothing in the towel. I've seen the light and riding off into this, spiritual location independent sunset. It was much more of a process of mastering my craft as I went through it, and there was a maturity that which I allowed to unfurl in the work as I went through it. Having said that, I don't think that it needs to take as long as it took me, and I think that right now we have got an abundance of people who've been through this process of weeding out through the corporate world or a more traditional career into a more creative, fulfilled, purposeful, meaningful way of living and working. So I think that had I started my work, say, 5 years later, I would have actually moved a lot more quickly, because there were more people doing it. I would have had more knowledge to draw on. So that would be the first thing, is that it doesn't need to happen overnight, but certainly, it doesn't also need to take as long as it took me. So that's part of my personal experience through it, was that it was so normal to me. By the time that I ended up moving into this full time, I already had a solid practice. I already had a solid client base. And that was because I built that up part-time whilst I was doing other things. So that's the first part. The second part was that I really transformed myself through this practice. It was a personal practice, which I started working with, of course, the lunar practice, which I now speak about. I've now worked with, hundreds of women and thousands of women worldwide through my words and my writing. So I have a good sense of how other people work with the practice, and it doesn't actually all need to, it is not sort of a female specific practice. It's just more that women tend to be drawn to the lunar side of things. But actually there's no real gender in the practice at all. I work with yin and yang as modes of operating, not as saying that, women need to be more yin or, that the moon is this female entity or anything like that. But, I did really find as I started to work with this personal practice in my own life that it transformed me from the inside out. And so I became a lot less stressed, a lot less anxious, a lot more trusting of life, a lot less controlling of my environment, a lot more willing to go with the flow. I became a lot happier. I had more energy. I had more vitality in my life for a lot of reasons. One of them because, as I mentioned before, I was really honoring my own body and really starting to move with what she wanted to do and how she wanted to be. And so I would find that played out not just making me more effective at work, but it allowed me to actually have a more, sort of joyful, energized experience of life in every single part of life. So what then happened as I was really going through this transformation myself is that people around me naturally started to ask, what are you doing? Like, what is going on here? So even people who, I wasn't necessarily sharing what I was doing with everyone, but I was in a legal environment, first in law. I still have a lot of legal friends, many of whom are now my clients, incidentally, because they've got to that point in their lives, they're there and their careers, and it is ticking a lot of boxes for them. And they're looking at me and they're seeing that I'm doing something quite different, and I'm so happy and I'm so fulfilled, and it's really working for me. And so people are naturally and have over the years naturally gravitated to me and asked the question of me, what are you doing? How can I learn to do what you're doing? How can I have an experience of life that you're having? Like, how can my PhD be joyful? Like, how I really want to write a book. Like, how can I do it in this way, which is going to, be really fun and not this terrible ordeal? And so I've become magnetic in a way. And I feel like that is what has helped me to work through resistance, because I'm living it and I'm breathing it, and I'm not out there proselytizing and telling people they need to be in a certain way, or they need to make changes, or they need to fix themselves. I think doing that kind of work is actually a really fast way to alienate people in your life. And particularly if you are working with resistance, I'm not trying to persuade anyone of anything. I'm really allowing myself to enjoy myself and to continue to do what's working. And I'm just drawing to me the people who want to learn more from me and who want to make these changes in their own life. So I think anyone around me, and yes, there have been some people, and I know that many of your listeners, I'm sure, when they're thinking about leaving something which is so tried and tested in terms of a more traditional career or a more traditional way of living, can encounter that sense of, people around them being anxious and worried for them, worried that they're throwing away something that's really good. And I think that really indicates a lot of the time, or it can reflect a sense of real, care on the part of the people in our lives. And that's how I've really looked at it in my life, that people who've been, wanting to be naysaying about what I'm doing, and there haven't been that many, but people who have, or people who think it's a bit strange or a bit weird or whatever, it's coming from a really good place. They're caring for me. They're wanting me to be okay. And so when I'm able to demonstrate to them just through how I am, and also showing, my business is successful, I'm doing what I love and I'm having a good time whilst I'm doing it, then that really dissipates, their own anxiety around it, because they're able to see that, yes, I did leave something that was good, but I've created something that's great and I'm living that.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your personal experience. I think that's going to mean a lot to so many listeners, truly, and me as well. Thank you. That was really great. So for those of our listeners who are interested, this book is incredible because it's so easy to read and it's so well researched. My favorite and most memorable experience through taking your salon, Ezzie, was just how easy it was to apply every day through setting the intention, and it was just so lighthearted and easy, and yet it had such a profound effect on how I was showing up. But also just how interesting and easy it was to go deeper with the practice every single time I'm doing it now. I think it's been my third or maybe fourth, I think it's my third moon cycle since we've been doing it. And I know it's going to get deeper, and that's really nice. And I think it's because of the concept of the yin and yang is so easy to relate to, and the way that it's weaved in and out 8 times throughout the cycle of the moon as per your lunar abundance practice. And so for someone like me or anyone else who's listening who is totally yang dominant, I found that to be a game changer, because it was always, go yang, 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 yang until you don't have any yang left, and then you have to go yin. And this is a beautiful and really gentle reminder to just slip into the yang, almost at times when it would feel uncomfortable to do so. Slip into the yin, almost at times when it would be uncomfortable to do so. Can you share a little bit about how the yin and the yang works with the moon cycles as per your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So like you said, there are the 8 phases of the moon, and the yin and the yang are weaved throughout. And so what that looks like is that one phase will be yang, and the next will be yin, and the next will be yang, and the next will be yin. And each one of the moon phases, because the moon cycle lasts for about a month, there's 8 moon phases in the month. That means that each one of those 8 moon phases will last for 3 or 4 days apiece. What that means is that you'll have 3 or 4 days of it being a yang phase, and 3 or 4 days then of it being a yin phase. And then it repeats. So 3 or 4 days then of it being a yang phase, and another 3 or 4 days of it being a yin phase. So the moon cycle starts at the new moon. That's the first of the 8 phases. And it's a yang cycle because it gets the cycle rolling. It's the beginning. And the yang mode of operating is very much around initiation, action, moving forwards, giving, talking, putting things out there into the world. Those are some characteristics or features of the yang mode of operating. And like you said, many of us are just like so all over that. And I certainly had to create this practice for myself because I was all over that. And exactly as you said, Hayley, like, oh my gosh, it's just like I feel it. I would just go and go and go and go and push and push and push and push until I burnt out. And I would just get so tired, or I would get sick, that, that was the only way my body knew how to get that sense of rest, was that sense of enforced rest. And so by working with 3 or 4 days of yang, or, that more forward motion, and then 3 or 4 days of yin as embedded in my schedule, and the yin phases being more about the resting and the restoring, more about the reflecting, more about the receiving. So for many of us who are often going in yang, we're very good at giving and perhaps can do with more practice with receiving, and is more about listening, more about being. I found by really embedding into my schedule, these yin phases, knowing when they're coming up, and knowing that, half the week approximately is going to be yin and half the week's going to approximately be yang, has been such a helpful way for me to get out of that cycle of just being on the hamster wheel. Because I don't say that the moon makes us do anything. I'm not saying like just because it's a yin phase that means the moon wants you to say that's not my interpretation. Rather, because I work with the moon as a natural timekeeper, the moon phases, the yin phases as they come around, give me permission to take my foot off the gas. And it's like this little reminder all the time, is because my natural wiring is to push, and my natural wiring is still to push and push and push. It takes a really long time to undo that social conditioning. And so that reminder just popping up with the yin phases to allow myself to go a little slower, just to be a little, gentler on myself, be a little kinder, is so helpful for me to have embedded into the month. So about half the month's going to be yin, about half the month's going to be yang, but it's going to be interchangeable. So when I am in a yang phase, it's not like I'm like pushing myself and trying to get all my work for the week done in that 3 or 4 days. And then the yin phase is not like them sitting on the couch watching Netflix or like going to the beach and drinking pina coladas or anything like that. That's not what I mean. It's the invitation is in both yang and both yin to really allow yourself to prioritize that way of being or that way of doing. So, for example, in a yang phase, I might try to schedule more clients, for instance, or do more promotional work. And this is the kind of thing which, I might need a little bit of a nudge to do. I love doing the creative writing, the free flow writing, and I tend to do that writing more in the yin phases, for instance. I tend to create content during the yin phases because that's something that's so, it feels very relaxed for me to be creating and being in that mode. But if it comes to writing up a sales page or, writing out an email newsletter or mapping out my content, as in what time is this going out on which channel at which time, for me, that's the kind of work which is more structured and I need a bit more of a bump. So I might do that, schedule that work more in a yang phase. And in a yin phase, it might be more about that creative work, which I've mentioned. Perhaps I do less client work. Perhaps I do less socializing, for instance. Or perhaps when I'm exercising, I might go to a yin yoga class or a restorative yoga class, or I might go for a walk instead of a run. I might have an early night rather than push myself to try to get that project finished or to do, go out and do that thing which I feel like maybe I should do, but I can hold that over to the next yang phase. And so yin and yang are always relative. There's still going to be work in yin times and there's still going to be rest as well in yang times. It's not like you're on the clock 24/7. And it's not like you're off the clock 24/7 in a yin phase. They always are dancing with each other, but it's more of a permission slip. It's more of a reminder to embed in to these times where it's more about receiving, more about resting, more about reflecting in the yin times, and more about moving forwards in the yang times. And it's a very sustainable way of living and working, particularly when you are really busy and juggling a lot of things because life is busy. It's not like work is just our sole focus. We've also got families and we've got, other interests outside of work. And if we don't have those things, if we don't have other interests, if we don't have, exercise processes, if we don't have creative passions, if we don't have ways to look after our body, with diet and other nourishing ways, then we're going to actually, we're going to suffer over time. So it's a way to have this more holistic, sustainable life. And I needed to create this for myself. And I still do this practice. I still follow this practice. I still follow the yin and the yang phases throughout each moon cycle because it helps me to maintain a sustainable, holistic, and effective life.
That word sustainable is potent at this point because I think so many of us, we realize that being yang dominant, we can just do yang all the time, but it's unsustainable. And the way that the phases of the moon are structured in you've got free downloads on your website which share about all the different moon phases and all the different times of when they happen and reflecting. And I just think it's really helped me feel so much more sustainable with my energy as well, coming from burnout myself. But I know that this is exactly what everyone listening will just love to hear. That word sustainable is so cool. So thank you. So I love this book. It's called An Abundant Life by Dr. Ezzie Spencer, Flourishing with the Cycles of the Moon. It's not only beautiful, it's full color. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's formatted so well that you can flick through and find the current moon phase and just read all about it with beautiful images and quotes and everything, which makes it so fun. But there's information and research and there's places you can go to find out more at the end of the book. Like it's just so all-encompassing. And at each phase of the moon, there's what to do, how to do it, and gentle reminders of that practice that it just goes on with you for life. So I'm going to recommend this book to everyone who's listening because I think you're amazing. And my last question to you is, what is your favorite moon phase at the moment?
It's so interesting, and I really do feel that, I mean, I love all of the yin phases.
Yeah, me too. I look forward to them.
Right? It's really funny because when you start to work with this practice, actually people can often find the yin phases can be a little challenging because it's just starting to unwind those old patterns of yang all the time. So it's like, but what do I do in a yin phase? But I have a lot about that in the book and lots of ideas and prompts and things in the book about what to do in a yin phase. And over time, you find, and here you are 3 moon cycles in, Ailey as well. It's like, the yin phases are great. Where have these been my whole life? And the final of the 8 moon phases is the balsamic moon phase. And it really is this beautiful phase. It's a beautiful yin phase. And it is this time for reflection and restoration. The word balsamic comes from a Latin word, and it basically means, it's about a balm. And I love the idea of having a balm for the soul. And so many of us, and we are in the yang mode and we're always moving forwards, we often do forget to look back and to see how far we've come and to celebrate our achievements and to feel grateful for what it is that we've managed to create in our lives and in our work. And so I love this sense of finishing the moon cycle in that balsamic moon phase, that 8th of the 8 moon phases in the one cycle, before you start again, before you race on to the next new moon and set your next intention and start afresh, which is also really stimulating and fun and enjoyable. But to take the time to take stock of where you've been and where you are, and to pat yourself on the back and just to give yourself some well-deserved time out at the balsamic moon phase is really beautiful. And so that's my favourite phase.
Oh, you know what? It's mine too. The first time I did the salon with you, I mean, so much happened in that month. It was phenomenal. But in the balsamic moon, I pulled out my journal and just started writing about all of the things that had happened, and so much more than I even realised had happened.
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful, life-affirming moment. It was amazing. Yeah, that's my favorite phase as well. So thank you so much, Ezzie. I mean, everyone's going to get so much out of that, and I really have enjoyed talking to you. Where can everyone find you? And you've got a podcast, you've got a blog, you've got free digital downloads, you've got Instagram, and you've got this amazing book. Where can everyone, and the salon, where can we find you?
There's an abundance of
an abundance. There's so much stuff. It's great.
Oh, thank you, love. My website is lunarabundance.com. That's spelled LUNAR, abundance.com. And if you go to the website, you can find the free downloads, which you mentioned, like a free lunar planner. There's one for the Northern Hemisphere, one for the Southern Hemisphere, with all of the dates of all of the moon phases. So if you're wondering where the moon is in the sky right now, I do recommend go outside at night and look up. Yeah. But then you can also download the free planner. So you've got all of the dates, and there's free resources and journaling resources and my podcast and everything you can get on my website. And on my Instagram, Lunar Abundance, I do post about each one of those 8 phases in real time with a little prompt there as well. So lots of ways to play.
And what about the book? Where can they find the book? Through the website?
Oh, yes, that's right. Okay. So you can get to the book, lunarabundance.com/book, and it's on the menu on the main website when you get there.
And of course, I'll be posting all of those links underneath this interview too. Thank you so much, Ezzie. I'm so grateful for your time today. It was wonderful, and I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone that was listening is going to just love what you have to share, and of course your book. Thank you, and we'll hopefully see you around or see you soon, and we'll all be following you.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure to be here, Hayley. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks, chick.